was during the height of the pandemic, when I thought it would be fun to get a job at a local haunted house attraction. My friend Marissa was already working there, told me they were looking for new actors. She pulled some strings and got me in after a brief meeting with the owner. The place had multiple sections, including 3 haunted houses and a haunted corn maze. On my first day, I rehearsed my character and demonstrated my acting skills to one of the supervisors. My role for the night was a damsel in distress, tied to a pole and yelling for help as guests walked past. The guests were informed not to touch the actors, so I wasn't too worried. Jeremiah, the shift coordinator, walked me to my post in the corn maze. I was genuinely surprised that I had to be tied up for real. When I asked about bathroom breaks, he assured me there would be short breaks and that a supervisor would be nearby if I needed anything. Once he left, I was alone, surrounded by eerie sound effects and scary ambiance loops echoing through the cornfield from hidden speakers. An air horn sounded in the distance, signaling the attraction was open. I was nervous but excited. Being in the middle of the corn maze, it took a few minutes before the first guest passed by. I put on my best performance, screaming and crying for help. Most people played along, improvising responses that I matched in character. Everyone wore face masks, so I couldn't see their entire faces. Eventually, 2 men in their 30s walked by, staring at me silently. One of them slowed down, giving me a creepy gaze with his big eyes before they continued down the path. There were long gaps between guests, and sometimes I heard someone brushing through the crops nearby, wondering if it was a staff member since guests weren't supposed to stray off the path. I turned around and saw the 2 men emerging from the crops, heading toward me. They were the same men from earlier. I broke character, telling them they couldn't stray off the path. One of them laughed under his mask, and they started speaking in a language I didn't recognize, possibly Russian. One man stood watch while the other approached me, inappropriately grabbing me. I realized what was happening and started screaming for help, shouting that it wasn't part of the act and that I was being assaulted. The supervisor quickly appeared, but by then the men had run off. I was untied and escorted out of the maze. I called my parents and they insisted I leave immediately. Jeremiah and another supervisor told me I'd be paid for the night and understood if I didn't want to return, asking only to keep them informed. I wish that was the end of it. On my drive home, I was extra cautious, ensuring I wasn't being followed. Halfway home, I noticed the same white car behind me. I started making random turns, but the car stayed with me every time. Realizing I was being followed, I headed to the nearest police station. The car followed me all the way until I pulled into the precinct's parking lot. Then it kept driving. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, calming my nerves before finally heading home, constantly checking that I wasn't being followed. I never returned to that haunted house job. It was an experience that left me shaken to my core, and I'm grateful it didn't end worse. This was the first and last time I ever set foot in a haunted house attraction. I live in Fort Worth, Texas, where every year there's this massive haunted house event. My friends were insistent that we go, and I figured it was time to finally experience one. For some context, I had a very troubled childhood that left me with PTSD, but more on that later. It was a weekend, and no one wanted to go in sober. My friend Noah hosted a pregame at his place. There were 6 of us 3 guys, including me and 2 of their girlfriends. We smoked and drank in Noah's backyard, thinking it would make the haunted house more fun. We bought our tickets online while we were pre-gaming. I rarely smoked weed because it makes me paranoid, but tonight I wanted to overcome that barrier. Surprisingly, I felt good. A mix of alcohol and weed seemed to cancel out my usual paranoia. Eventually, we called an Uber to the attraction, which was about 20 minutes away. There was a half-hour line and the place was busy. We made friendly chat with the people ahead of us. I was pretty cross-faded, but still coherent. As we got to the front, I started feeling woozy, but didn't mention it to my friends. The haunted house was intense right from the start, with actors screaming and jumping out at us. The anxiety began to set in, and I realized smoking was a mistake. One of the actors must have noticed how scared and quiet I was because he got right in my face trying to scare me with yelling and noises. I was internally freaking out but trying to keep it together. The haunted house seemed to go on forever. Each jump scare made my heart race. The flashing lights and fog made everything surreal. Then we entered a room bathed in an eerie red glow. A man in a bloodied suit and top hat was part of the act, yelling at us. But behind him, in the corner, stood a man staring at me with a chilling intensity. It was my father. I screamed from the depths of my soul, feeling every hair on my body stand on end. The room went silent. My friends laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But when they saw my serious expression, one of the girls grabbed me, asking what was wrong. I pointed to the corner where no one stood now. My friends and the actor were confused, and everyone could tell I wasn't messing around. My friends knew about my troubled past to some extent. One of them said, "There's no one there." The actor asked if I was okay. I was in the midst of a full-on panic attack, shouting that I wanted to leave. Noah led me out through a side exit and sat with me while our friends finished the attraction. I wasn't going to ruin their night because of my freakout. Noah reassured me, saying I shouldn't have smoked so much and that my dad wasn't really there, I was just hallucinating. My father had abused my siblings and me before leaving us when I was 10. My close friends knew this to some extent, so I didn't have to explain much to Noah. When our friends were done, we met at a nearby Wendy's. I tried to eat to calm down. Embarrassed, I decided to head home early, not wanting to spoil their night. I passed out almost immediately, likely from the mix of alcohol and weed. That night I had a nightmare about the haunted house, with my father standing in the corner, saying, "Wake up, Charlie." I woke up in my dark room, and there he was, towering over my bed with eyes wide open, his body impossibly contorted. I screamed. My mom rushed in and turned on the lights, and the apparition vanished. My heart raced, and I cried to my mom, telling her I saw Dad. It was one of the most scarring nights of my adult life. Since then, I've stayed away from weed and any substances besides light alcohol, and I'm never going to a haunted house attraction again. It was unofficially called Phantom's Peak because of a cheap sign that looked like it came from a party store propped up in front of a grassy area designated as a parking lot. This was the year they closed down, and this was the year my friends and I decided to go. I went with Jake, Emily, and David. We chose a Thursday night since we were all college students with Fridays off, so it was quieter than a weekend would have been. Surprisingly, there was no line at the ticket stand, and when we followed the directions to the entrance, only a few people were ahead of us. What we didn't realize was that they were only letting one person in at a time. If anything, this added to the scare factor. We pushed David to go first. I was second to last, with Emily behind me. As Jake disappeared into the darkness ahead of me, I started to get nervous. I hadn't done a haunted house since I was a kid. It was my turn next. A woman in a bloody costume opened the door and motioned for me to enter. I stepped into the dark building, illuminated mainly by small, flashing lights. Gruesome props of mutilated corpses and other horrific scenes greeted me. Actors in terrifying costumes jumped out from hidden spots, making me scream each time. Walking down a particularly dark hallway, I felt something brush against me from behind. I turned and saw a tall figure, which I assumed was an actor, but then he started pushing me down the hallway. I went along, thinking it was part of the attraction. Pushed me into a room and closed the door behind us. In pitch blackness, hands started grabbing me, not in a playful haunted house way, but forcefully. I pushed him off and yelled, "Get off me," but he didn't respond. I was getting seriously scared now. I turned on my phone's flashlight, even though it was against the rules, and saw I was in a storage room with janitorial equipment. But the most chilling sight was the man in black standing a few feet away, wearing a half-face mask. I bolted out of the room, flashlight guiding me back to the hallway. I found the next actor, a teenager, and told him what happened. He broke character and pointed me towards the exit. I speed walked through the rest of the house, ignoring the remaining scares, and finally made it outside. My friends were waiting, confused about how I was the last to come out. I told them everything, and we went to the ticket stand to report it. The worker there said the manager wasn't in but would be back the next day. I got my money back, but the real shock came the following day. A girl from our college posted on Facebook that she had been sexually assaulted at the same haunted house the night we were there. She pressed charges, and the place was shut down. Reaching out to her, I learned our experiences were disturbingly similar. The man didn't work for the attraction, yet no one stopped him from entering. It was a horrifying reminder of how easily fun can turn into a nightmare.